Okay, Mary, you're good to go.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's going to be an exciting evening. We have my friend, Mark Goldman, here with another one of his terrific books, and you'll get to meet him in just a second. But before we begin, I'd just like to share a little bit about our book club, which has been running for about 14 or 15 years now. We started as a docent initiative, reading the books that Charles Birchfield read, just to have a chance to get into his mind and see the kinds of things he liked and what influenced his work. But we quickly morphed into reading local authors. And since that time, we have welcomed over 75 local authors. And Mark has been with us a number of times. So it's so exciting that he's back again this evening. I have some really exciting news, and that is we have a new facilitator this evening, and her name, many of you may know her from her days here in Buffalo, is Maureen Patricia Kane. She was born and raised in Western New York. I believe she was from the town of Tonawanda, Kenmore area, a 1970 graduate of Mount St. Mary's Academy, and attended Buffalo State as an art education major before transferring to Arizona State University in 1974, and has never returned, at least not permanently. However, she found us during COVID, and we're so excited that she offered to facilitate tonight's book. So I'm going to introduce you to Maureen, and she will have the honor of introducing Mark to all of you. Maureen?
Thank you, Mary. Well, I'm honored and happy to be hosting this book club discussion on Mark Goldman's latest book, City of My Heart, Buffalo, 1967 to 2020, his fifth book about the city, and after his children's book, Max Meets the Mayor, his favorite. I received this book as a gift last year from my brother and sister-in-law, Denny and Toby Kane, because they know how much I love Buffalo, my hometown. I really enjoyed reading it, and I learned a lot from it. It's filled with entertaining little gems about Buffalo history and the people who had a hand in shaping that history over the years. And in his own unique way, Mark Goldman is one of those people. Born in New York City, he came to Buffalo in 1967 to attend UB. And after earning his doctorate there, and he wrote his dissertation on the history and development of Black Rock, he created a career, as he described it, as a student of Buffalo, a writer about Buffalo's history, and an activist concerned with and engaged in the present. Among other things, Mark has spurred the creation of a Latin disco, an art center in a laundromat, bus tours of Buffalo, a hot dog stand on the corner of Chippewa and Franklin, an international marathon, a popular cafe and a repurposed hardware store, a theater space showcasing everything from jazz to a retired cop's original play, and so much more. And it's all right here in the book. It's my pleasure to introduce an adept researcher, an engaging writer, and a guy who has so much love in his heart for Buffalo, author Mark Goldman.
Wow, that was a wonderful introduction. I love the way you, that was great. I mean, you talked about, small things like a hot dog stand and a laundromat. That was great. I mean, if I die tomorrow, I'd like that to be my obituary. That was perfect. But thank you so much. And I'm happy to be here. I see some people that I know. I guess you can hear me, but I can't hear or see any of you. But so why is this my second favorite book? Of course, my first favorite book has to do with my children, my grandchild, Max, which was, I wrote about that here. So I think the idea of writing this book occurred to me right around the time of the COVID, when I didn't really have much to do anyway. And I found myself getting increasingly connected to the city during COVID. I mean, I went out all over the place, not inside, of course, but I found myself walking everywhere all the time. I feel bad for Maureen because she can't walk anywhere where she lives because of the heat apparently, but the COVID hit him. It was in the spring, really late winter, early March, early spring, as you know. So we could go out. I went everywhere, and I was particularly touched that I was able to see the changing seasons up close. In March, April, May, and I always had a sentimental attachment to Buffalo, but I sort of found that growing during the COVID, and I drove around also a lot during COVID. I always drive around. Ever since I got here, I've been driving around Buffalo, and I find, I know all the tiny little streets, ins and outs, and one of the things I found, and I took a photograph. I was driving down Hurdle Avenue, and I took it. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but it struck me, and I used it as a back piece on the book. It's a photograph of the marquee of the North Park movie theater, and it was very, very touching to me to see that. Always look on the bright side of life, stay strong, Buffalo. And that was March 2020. So, there were a lot of things going on at that time. And for me, my connections to Buffalo were rooted in intellectual interests, but they're also very personal. It's here that I raised my family, and here that I saw my grandkids born, and I have many personal relationships here. So for me, living here has always been sort of a sensual or sensuous, not in the senses, in the sense that I've engaged my senses, experience. And I don't know what led me to write it. I like to write, as all guys see is here. I mean, if you're a writer, you like to write. That's what you like to do. Your day doesn't feel complete unless you're writing, and so I decided to write this. And I don't quite know how I started. I knew I wanted to write a first-person piece, which I'd never done before. And writing the first person is wonderful because it frees you up so much from dependence on factual material. Everything is your point of view, and you don't have to pretend it's not. It is your point of view, and it enables you a kind of freedom that, say, third person narrative writing doesn't allow. And so I started in the beginning. I started my upbringing in New York, and I wrote a chapter there, which I enjoyed doing. I had not really sat down and thought about my life in New York in terms of how it might have affected my thinking about Buffalo. And I wanted to, then I sort of follow chronologically. The first or second chapter is a chapter on how I found Buffalo in 1967 when I got here. And that's really the only chapter that I did any research on, because I had to go back and look and see what the heck was going on here. And I do remember quite a bit, not so much events, but people that I met. And throughout the book, I wanted to tell stories about individuals that I met, because that, to me, has been the most enjoyable part of my life here, is meeting the people that I've met. I'm a open and accessible and friendly kind of a guy. And so I've made it's been easy for me to meet people. And, I had a very interesting experience just a few weeks ago. I was driving a friend of mine around, this guy who lived here, and he lives in Newton, Massachusetts, came back, and we were driving around, and he said, you must be so proud because so many of the things that you thought about are coming due or something like that. And I said, what I'm most proud about, and it's really true, is that we were driving around, this friend Bob and I can go to places in Buffalo. When what I'm most proud about are you a Kane? Are you a South Buffalo Kane, by the way, Maureen? No. So So we're driving around South Buffalo. I can get out of my car in South Buffalo and I'll know 5 or 6 people in South Buffalo. I'll drive over to the East Ferry Street area where I've done some research and I know 4 or 5 or so people over there. I just know random people because I ran, it's funny that, it's this Latin disco in downtown Buffalo. So I can go to the Puerto Rican West Side and, hey, Marcolino, how you doing? So that it has been kind of a glue for me. And I wanted to include these, it's a wonderful storytelling opportunity. And so many characters, I think, come alive in this book who normally would not have had I not sat down and told their story. I mean, maybe the lead characters are everybody's friend Joey Giambra. Well, I wrote all about Joey Giambra, and I mean, he's going to live forever. The guy who owned the Calumet building, this Sicilian immigrant. And I wrote a whole chapter on the students. I used to teach at this wonderful school called Empire State College, which is a branch of the SUNY system where we'd work individually with adults primarily. And I met very interesting people there, students. And I met through them, I'd learn about the city because we would design learning contracts, we call them, around things that they were interested in. And I was always say, well, what about studying your neighborhood? What about studying the history of your community? So I had a Native American guy, this old guy named Hector Titus. I changed his name for the book, Seneca Indian. And he took me around and showed me all the Seneca remains. And with this Italian American guy who introduced me to his friends and family at what used to be called St. Lucy's Parish on East Buffalo. And I don't know, it's one person, and then I fell in love for some reason. I don't know if you're familiar with, many of you are, with Robert Caro. He, in one of his volumes on Lyndon Johnson, in order to get Lyndon Johnson's early biography in East Texas right, he wanted to get it right, he moved to East Texas. He rented a house on the plains. We lived there for 2 years. And my daughter, I was kind of doing the same in South Buffalo. I spent about the better part of 6 months hanging out in South Buffalo. This was before the pandemic. My daughter said, why don't you're like Robert Caro. Why don't you just get a cabin on Tuscarora Street or something? And I met, I became involved with Irish American history and the Buffalo Irish Center and the Hannigan family and the Ryans and you name it. And, it sort of became this onion that kept unraveling for me. And then I would go home and write about it. What could be more fun than that? And I sort of had this sort of sounds a little mad or random, but there is a method to all this. I had a set of chapters that I definitely wanted to write about. I knew after spending all that time in South Buffalo, I wanted to write about, the people I'd met there were very, very thick and thick in the sense of a strong sense of belonging. And I wanted to write about that sense of belonging in South Buffalo. And before I knew it, the book is about belonging and how do people make connections to a city? How do they create bonds? Like poor Maureen had them and left. How do we create ties, lasting ties to a city? Because I found in looking at my own life that, hey, you did the same. You came from somewhere else. And how did you, Mark? That's the autobiography. I haven't really talked about this or thought about it this much. The autobiographical piece here is, and I appreciate the opportunity to do it, the autobiographical piece here is how does Mark, who comes from New York and when he's 20-odd years old, how does he make life ties that last him a lifetime here? How do you do that? And how does it happen? And what's the value of it? I mean, I personally have found tremendous value in it. It's given me a sense of personal stability. It's created I don't have kids who left town. Maybe it would have been better had they. I don't really know. I just heard a joke. Somebody was talking about this Roe v. Wade thing, and they talk about, when does life begin? Is it 6 months, or 5 months, or 3 months? And this guy said, I know life begins when your kids move out of the house. So but my kids kind of really did it. I mean, they moved out of the house, but my son, I have a son in New York, but I have a son here in Buffalo, a daughter with her 2 kids here in Buffalo. And then I was interested in how they became attached. And my daughter and her 2 kids, my 2 grandsons, live in Central Park in North Buffalo. And I started to get familiar with North Buffalo. And particularly my son, Max, who was the subject of a very well-known book called Max Meets the Mayor. He got very involved in Little League Baseball at a park on Hurdle Avenue called Shoshone Park. And all of a sudden, Shoshone baseball became a big integral part of his daily life in the summer and the friends he made. And I said, wow, something is going on here. So I looked for Stretch, and I don't know how well you folks know North Buffalo, but it's a writer, particularly one writing in the first person, can look for things and make up, not make up, but strengthen themes. And the theme that I found floating through all of North Buffalo is a sense of faith, mostly Catholic faith. I'm not Catholic, obviously, but a very strong sense of attachment to parishes. And I was in, so, there are 4 or 5 Catholic parishes that surround North Central Park, and all of these parishes feed the Shoshone. And so there's this web of connections that go from neighborhood to parish school to baseball. And I turn this into this romantic thing. I mean, I don't know. To me, it's true. And to me, elements of it are true. I don't know. Other people say, what the heck's this guy talking about? It's just a dump and nobody really cares about each other, blah, blah, blah. But that's not how I choose to see things. I was asked some months ago to give a talk at UB about this, and I was kind of skeptical because I'm not an academic. And I don't think of myself as being an academic. I'm not an academic. And I don't, so people in the academy are, I don't know, particularly UB, and they're all, they're super cynical, and they're very, for most academics, at least in the social sciences, the glass is always half empty, it's never half full. Why didn't you, and so they're talking about, you didn't talk about how bad this is, or you didn't talk about this over there, and you didn't talk about the corrupt politics. You didn't like that. That's not my job. Somebody else do that. My job as a historian, a writer, the way I see it is not, I want to celebrate the things that tie people to a place. As I told, I'm getting older, and these are all people in their 30s and 20s, and I said, I don't have time for cynicism in my life. I just don't have time to be cynical. And so this is a very uncynical book. It is, I call it a Valentine, actually. I want this book, Mark says, here you go, look at this. So I also, at the time I was writing this during the COVID, I got interested in Buddhist meditation. And so this is what I wrote. I want this book to water the wholesome, which is a phrase, as probably many of you know, it's one of Thich Nhat Hanh's favorite phrases. We got to water the wholesome to help us hold on to hope and the promise of tomorrow. Well, that's what I want, and I really believe that's how we're going to have a city. That's how I want my kids and my grandkids to love the city they live in. So in order for them to do that, we got to water the positive. And I never, ever have, I'm not Pollyanna-ish, and I notice and point out problems that we have, but I've never tried to undermine my children's attachment and connection to where they live, because it leads to alienation if you don't feel connected. That's my belief. But anyway, so it's kind of hokey, it's sentimental. I like it. I like the writing, frankly. Are you all readers? If I may say so, I think it's well written. I think it tells really interesting stories. And I think they're not only, they're valuable. I think as students can learn about how to study history here. There's several of the chapters really deal with how I went about, did my research. You know, I wrote a dissertation on Black Rock. There were no secondary sources for that. You know, it was all found material, old newspapers, photographs, records. In this chapter, basically, for anybody who wants to learn how to do a neighborhood history, this should be a guide. I'm sorry that UB, they would print this up and use it for people as a guide to how do you study a neighborhood. There's a whole chapter here on, I got very involved in public affairs in Buffalo in the early 1970s because I was a pretty good long distance runner, believe it or not. And friends of mine and I used to run in Delaware Park. And at the time, Delaware Park was basically off limits to pedestrians. It was a vehicular pass through. That some of you may remember this. I'm not sure exactly when Olga got here. She probably remembers that. There are not too many things that I remember that Olga doesn't remember. And I got very involved with public affairs around controlling auto vehicular traffic in Delaware Park. And I met phenomenal people who were doing it too. And this was the 70s, the worst period in Buffalo's history. And we all got together and said, who cares about it? We're going to make this thing work. And I wrote about the people I worked with. Bill Hoyt, who was a councilman, his wife, Carol Hoyt, Joan Bozer, who was an assemblywoman at the time. I can't remember, Jesse Kriegel, who was a member of the Buffalo Philharmonic, and he and I and Alan Gross organized a running race through Delaware Park and into Canada. So there was this can-do mentality among the people that I was familiar with in the 70s. And I wrote about that. I went to work, my first teaching job was for Harold Cohn, who you probably know is the Dean of the School of Architecture. And I taught one course or two courses out there, that's all. But he was very, very engaged and very energetic and very positive about doing revitalization of Buffalo. And I worked with him. And so I tell a little bit of his story. I mean, it was, you know, just a lot of really interesting folks. Then I got very involved through my kids. Both my kids went to City Honors in the late 80s. And City Honors was a product of Judge Curtin's school desegregation program. And I was very drawn to the notion that Buffalo, which was found to be in violation of the Brown versus the Board of Education, and we were running a segregated and unconstitutional school system here, and Curtin made us integrate it, but he didn't mandate it. He did it through citizen engagement. And I was deeply impressed by what he did. And I became friends with Judge Curtin, which was a very, very significant relationship for me. And I wrote in this book about how people together dealt, not always successfully, with this notion of school integration. And, you know, people say, well, it didn't work out. Or so I said, I'm not interested in it didn't work out. I'm interested in how we tried to make it work out. You write about why it didn't work out. I'm not going to do that. So, so there's a chapter there. And then I got involved in 1988 when the people were giving away the city of Buffalo. I was close to my brother, who was very interesting, developed historic properties in New York. And we were driving around one time and we came across this building on the corner of Chippewa and Franklin Street. He said, oh my God, that's the most incredible building I've ever seen. And we went up and there was a little handwritten, which I wrote about, a little handwritten for sale sign on it, you know. So call Charlie if you want to buy this building. So we called him, you know, and here was this guy at the end of the phone. This guy speaks heavy Sicilian accent. He wanted to unload the building, it was all empty. And we made an unbelievable deal to buy it with my brother's help, not financially, but, well, a little bit financially. But so we bought this building. It's gorgeous. I don't know how many of you know the building. but we bought the building. We gave him $20,000 in cash, and he held a 20-year interest-only mortgage for the other $200,000. So I basically owned this building for about $600 a month, which enabled me to do, instead of spending money on the building, where I was able to, we'd rehab the downstairs. And I, grew up, this is where my New York thing, I was very, my mother was very involved with the arts in New York. So I took what I knew about arts and urbanism and tried to combine them in the Calumet Arts Café. And I wrote about that. And I wrote about, I met really interesting people there. And I, at the time, Vincent and Josephine and there was no such thing as the Irish Classical Theater. There were these 3 Irish people walking around Buffalo, sort of homeless, looking for a place to put on plays. So we made an arrangement, and we built a theater for them, and that was their first theater. And that's a wonderful story. And I met tons of musicians, and I met Art. I mean, it's just, that was another whole great experience. And I met Joey Giambra. I mean, that if you meet, that is enough. Is all you have to do is meet Joey Giambra. You don't need to meet anybody else. And then, how are we doing? You want to get more of this or no? Yeah. What, Maureen? Do you want to? So
Yeah, Maureen,
I
ask a
have a
question or two.
Maybe I could just finish with, not finish, but so at some point, I don't know when, I came across this quotation from the prophet Jeremiah. And he was an Old Testament prophet who commented in 600 BC, that's even before my time, 600 BC, about what happened when Solomon's temple got destroyed by the Babylonians. That was, the Israelites had a state there, Judea, and the Babylonians came and they conquered it, and they dispersed the people. They dispersed I don't know if you call them Jewish people yet, they weren't quite there, but they displaced these Israelites, I guess you call them, to Babylon, and it led to this famous Babylonian captivity. So here they are in exile, like Maureen, they're in exile. So what do? Are they going to grouse about it? Are they going to complain that it's too hot or it's too cold or the food's no good or they don't have the bills or no? So this is what Jeremiah writes. He says, and I use this as a guide. He said, build houses and settle down. This is in the Old Testament. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons. Give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in numbers there. Do not decrease. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you in exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. So I said, wow, that's my story, the story of Jeremiah. So I use that as a theme of how do you do that? How do you and go in exile? Nobody in my family had ever lived outside of New York ever. And and my mother, she would tell her friends, I was joking, I think after a while, she would say, no, he's coming home on Sunday. He'll be back when the weekend's over, And so 40 years later, she tells, don't worry, Mark's coming home on Sunday. So, but so how does he, Mark, do that? And that's really what it's a story about how me, created a home in a place where I was a stranger and turned that sense of being a stranger into a very strong sense of belonging.
Nice.
Mary knows I could go on forever, but but let's open it up to.
So if anyone in the participants have any questions for Mark, use the Q&A section and I'll relay those questions to him. But Maureen, if you have questions, you can.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about, I know the slow roll bike tour was recent. I think there was another one not too long ago.
Yeah,
And you talked about it starting at East Ferry and Michigan Streets and all the history there, like the Cold
Right.
Spring and Offerman Stadium. And
right.
I wondered if you could just talk about like what the riders might not know about the ground they're pedaling over.
Well, you ask great questions. So I was struck by, you all familiar with the slow roll, where they, every once a week, I think in the summer, they go through different neighborhoods. And I had gotten a grant a couple of years ago, I think in 2016 or 2017, to study what I'd call the Ferry Street corridor, which I write about. So I had conceived of Ferry Street as a corridor, which it is. It runs from the Niagara River on the west side to Bailey Avenue on the east side. It runs, you know, through the immigrant west side, the new immigrant west side, the old Italian west side, runs right through the heart of the Albright Estate, the old ferry in Elmwood and Delaware, Canisius College, the Elmwood District. It runs through the east side, and it runs into a place called Cold Spring. And I thought that history should be revealed. Nobody knows anything about that stuff.
Right.
And I had this idea of doing it through public engagement. And I worked a little bit, none of it worked out. Some of it worked out. But I was working with the NFTA to create all the bus stations. There would be history there, and you could have a GPS and plug in and what happened here kind of thing, or what happened there. And I wanted to use that, what's now called a Freedom Wall, which I don't like at all. I had originally another idea for the Freedom Wall, which we did start, but then it was taken down. But I had this idea that I wanted to connect, by connecting people to the history of the place that they live, not only do they become better citizens. So here we were, hundreds of us at this gathering in front of the Bethel AME Church on Ferry in Michigan, in front of what used to be Offerman Stadium, which was this unbelievable baseball field from 1924 to 1960, in front of the heart of early mid 20th century Black history in Buffalo. And nobody knew it. And I thought, come on, this is what my job is to help these people who are here, but they don't, and they're happy they're on their bikes for sure, and they're going to get your 10,000 steps in and all that stuff. But they were disconnected from where they were part of it. But that's a big job, and most people really, I got to tell you, don't care about this. And that's the problem I find, and I don't feel bad about it. Most people don't care about the things that I care about. So, I'm trying to either accept that and move on, or because otherwise I'll just go around being disappointed all the time. So that's my story. But I mean, this Offerman Stadium, I've been trying to, I don't know how to write a play, but for 5 years, I've been trying to work with playwrights. This story of Offerman Stadium it's an August Wilson story waiting to be told.
Oh.
And it's there. There's barely a marker there that the stadium was there. But anyway, that's basically what the nature of my work has been, is to, how do we tie people to place? I have been for 10 years and still am involved with trying to bring history to what we call Canal Side here in Buffalo. Yeah. The Inner Harbor, the waterfront, the commercial slip. And we're coming up on the 200th anniversary of the completion of the Erie Canal. And I've had this program since 2013. It's called It Happened Here, where we've used theater and performance to create original performance pieces about the history of that place, at the place that it happened. Well, so there's some of that kind of stuff going on, but it's very hard to do all this stuff. And we need, for any good thing, you need a czar for everything. Otherwise, nothing ever gets done without a czar. We don't want czars either, so I don't know.
Well,
So go ahead, I'm sorry.
who might that be in Buffalo? Who are the most likely Buffalonians to, as you
Yeah, I mean, this stuff has to come from the
got a new
bottom
one.
up, or it doesn't work. It has to come from the ground up. So, I mean, I don't, you can't expect perfection at all, if you, and I don't know. I mean, anybody, most of us, this is off the topic, most of us who have provocative ideas are disappointed, I would say, because it's very difficult to realize. Although you take something like, 40 years ago, who would have thought? Edna Lindemann, it's like, you kidding? What? You can do what? And, here we are 50 years later with Mary at the Birchfield Center. And
Gratefully, I am there.
right.
Yeah,
And
with Michaela.
so, and I see also that, who was here from the Birchfield? She just left. Where is she? Oh, she's not here anymore. She was a participant. So, it takes a lot of effort and commitment. Look how long it took these crazy reactionaries in this country to overrule Roe v. Wade. They didn't do that starting in May. They started doing that in 1970, and they've been working at it. That's how long it's taken. That's how long it takes to get anything. Now, I'm not saying it's worthwhile, but I admire the organizational skill, but how they did that. And I admire the way the Birchfield has been able to. Edna Lindemann would probably be unbelievably proud, and now she came to see this, right? So I don't know. Things are difficult, and all you can do is, it's a great line in a Bob Dylan song. All you can do is do what you must do, but do it well. And so now I'm working on a wonderful, it has nothing to do with Buffalo, but those of you interested in these kinds of ideas would appreciate it. Haven't really talked about it much. I've just been working on it a couple of months. I don't know what I'm going to do with that, but it's at the intersection of art and history, and it has to do with how European modernism in the 1920s and 1930s came to America basically through the Parisian gallery dealers who were kicked out by the Nazis, and the movement of modern art through these gallerists who came into New York. And so I found this one gallery guy who left some very, very interesting material that I'm working with. And it's totally new material to me, but it's so fascinating. And that's another thing. People do care about stuff like that.
Mark, I just want to make a comment about something you said, and that is that nobody cares, but I think they don't know it's there. And I think they would care if they knew about Offerman Stadium.
Well, how are you going to get them to know?
I'm not quite sure, but I think it's fascinating to think about what came before and where you're standing, and how the world looked and how it would look to Edna Lindemann to see the Birchfield today. And thank God there are people like you to remind us.
If it were up to me, I would create a core of people who have power and independent power and independent budget to implement citywide programs, educational programs, year-round educational programs that engage people at all different levels in learning about the history of their city. It would be a project, just like you have a department of the police or a fire department. You would have a department who's a heritage, whatever you want. And there would be a commissioner, and that commissioner would have to work for him or her, and they would have a budget, and they would infuse heritage into the woof and warp of our community, because otherwise it can't get done. It can't be done by me or a guy writing here, there, or a little bit here, a little bit there. You got to get it into the DNA more, So into the landscape, the intellectual landscape and the physical landscape. You got to get it into both, right?
Yes.
So
And
let's.
what would that do for us? It would
What?
think of what that could do for us. Make us all
Absolutely.
more empathetic, more connected,
More connected, more knowledgeable, more informed. I mean, wouldn't it, it would be
more
extraordinary.
appreciative.
Yeah, I mean, it would, and you could tie that to civics curriculum, learning about the city. But you know, you want to do that, I'll do that with you. How many more letters am I going to write that go unanswered? I've been trying to do this for so many years. So, but I don't mind. The good that we do lives on. I don't know. Mary, what are you doing up there at the Birchfield?
Well, I've just worked with 21 incredible
Docents.
docents who are
Oh,
going
wow,
to carry
there you
on
go.
the legacy of giving tours to whomever it is that walks through that door and help them to understand all of the things we just talked about.
Right. I mean, that is a model that could be replicated citywide. You could have docents, you know, there's some, you know, or activating public places with historical information now that you have all these smartphone connections to everything while you're waiting on a bus or doing the, you know, or there's endless number of things, but we are, I don't know, I mean, I love Buffalo very much. I wouldn't live anywhere else, but we are basically behind the times in so many things here. And this is the kind of thinking that we are way behind the times in. And you go to most other cities, they would have programs like what we're talking about, Chicago, Cleveland. Something's wrong here. We just can't figure it out. We can barely keep our streets clean in this friggin' city, right? Maureen, you got to come back and pick up the garbage with me.
I do that on the beach. I take a bag out every day and walk the beach and put all the cigarillo tips in there and all the other crap.
But I think, see, that I do see this as development opportunities. I mean, if you want to develop a community going forward, one of the good ways to do it is tie the community to its past better. So,
what about all the, you mentioned, you know, the out of many one blending, like there's all different neighborhoods, but
yeah,
can unity be achieved as well? You know, have a city.
Sure.
Yeah, how does that work? How would that look?
those are great. Another great question. I think one of the ways you do it is around the history.
History.
I mean, let's just say so we had this meeting today about the, what do we, you know, this canal side thing, 2025. I don't know if you folks know, there's an organization in town called the Buffalo Maritime Center, which is built. Are you familiar? No, but I can't see if anybody's.
Nope.
Well, that would be something you should see when you're here. Mary, are you familiar with the Buffalo Maritime Center? Without going into it, they have an exhibit there now. It's right at the commercial slip, which is the, you know, the origin point of the city of Buffalo, the birthplace, the sacred site. And they have there an exhibition that celebrates this Howden, I never could pronounce it, the Seneca Indians. So you can, and today this meeting, Barbara Nevergoes, they're talking about how we're going to bring African-American history to the site. And so, you know, you create a sense of commonality around a site, like around a story, like the Erie Canal story. It's a way of making connections. You know, I still spend a lot of time in Delaware Park, a lot of time in Delaware Park, even though I live right around the corner from Kleinhaus, but I spend a ton of time in Delaware Park. And I don't know if you know it, but beginning with COVID, one of the things that we advocated for in 1974 was to get cars out of the park. Finally, they slowly slowed them down, lowered the speed limit, separated them from the pedestrians, one thing after another. COVID, they took them all out. No more cars circulating around Delaware Park. And so this spring, I make phone calls to people. And so I would call up there's these partitions, temporary wooden, stupid looking barriers, keeping cars out. And I called up the woman who runs the homestead. I said, what do you think? Can we get some nice gates here or something? So, well, we're thinking about maybe bringing the cars back in the park. And I said to her, you've got to be kidding me. I mean, for 40 years, you've got to be kidding me. She said, yep, well, the city, this and the other. And I was livid about this thing. So I went on, organized a social media campaign. And we all of a sudden we got Facebook page and they got about 1,500 signatures. And they're not going to bring the cars back in Delaware Park. But the point of the story is what goes on in Delaware. I don't know how many of you get up there, but if you go to the Ring Road, which is the road that we're talking about where they want to bring cars back, if you go there any weekday afternoon from 3 o'clock on, any Saturday and Sunday from 9 in the morning to 4, you will find the most diverse group of people that you've ever seen. There's women, the Hajis, and there's Black women, and there's white women, and there's Indians playing tennis, and it's extraordinary. And that is because Olmsted had such a brilliant original conception. And if forget Edna Lindemann, if Frederick Olmsted were to come back and go to the Ring Road on a Saturday or Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, he said, it works. So, that you strengthen your public places, public spaces and public places. I was at a wonderful event the other day at what do you call it? The Juneteenth. I don't like festivals. I don't like eating when I'm walking. I just don't really like all that stuff. People go to festivals and food is just dripping all over them. It's disgusting, But anyway, but I said, well, I'm going to go. So I went early in the Sunday morning, and it was fabulous. There's African vendors and all kinds of people. But this kind of, this is an important way to think. And you don't need your leaders to think this way, but you need your leaders to be responsive to people who do think this way. And here it's very tough to get that, I find. Very difficult to get that. So it's inexcusable the way the city looks half the time. I mean, it's nice in nice places. But I mean, if you go look on Elmwood Avenue from Utica Avenue South, it's disgusting. You wouldn't want to go there. If you walk downtown Buffalo anytime, it's horrible. You really wouldn't want to go. Nighttime. It's just, we just don't know how to do this basic stuff yet, let alone think about integrating heritage with the this and the that. So we've got to get Maureen back. What?
But what's it going to take? No, I'm not coming back to do the garbage. No, really, what is it going to take? It
takes more people coming who, for the first time, when I started doing this work in the 70s, there was nobody doing it, really nobody. Nobody had read. Half the books that people now read as gospel haven't written. Nobody here knew who Jane Jacobs. I went to school of architecture in 1974. They didn't know who Jane Jacobs was. They never heard of her. But now all of the stuff has become part of the common language. Placemaking, high density, people on the streets, lighter, quicker, cheaper. All of the stuff that was unheard of 20 years ago has become part of the vocabulary now. And I think that's good. I mean, you get all these, I don't know there's tons of young people walking around Buffalo. I don't know what, drinking beer. I mean, we must sell more beer in Buffalo than any place in the world. It's unbelievable how much beer is sold here. But I guess, those people who are drinking beer are the future. They're all young people and, tattoos, and I don't know, but so sometimes I get jaded, obviously, but most of the time I'm very hopeful, and I love going to, you want the greatest source of hope and joy is going to watch your grandkids play baseball. So if any of you are looking for a thrill, Saturday at 9:30, a show shown I got Max, who's in the 14U travel team. He's got a game, Eli 12U. Just come over to Shoshone and watch the kids play. But seriously, these are such wholesome activities. And Shoshone, the baseball, that's the name of the park, is very, very diverse, very, very comfortably and wholesomely diversified. So there you go.
But that was a lot. Maureen, I'm going to defer to your questions.
Oh, I was just wondering if Mark had any advice for Buffalonians who might, like I did, X amount of years ago. We won't go into how many, but do you have any advice for young Buffalonians who might be thinking of leaving Western New York?
Not advice. I mean, I think you want to, it's hard to give young people advice. I mean, if they're set on something, it's hard to give anybody advice. But if they're ambivalent, you can give somebody advice. So what do you think? I'm not really sure. Yeah, I have advice for people who are ambivalent. I'm not really sure. The greatest one is what, from my grandmother. She said, you can move wherever you want to, but you're going to take your head with you wherever you go, kid. Don't forget that. So, you can go to Phoenix or Paris, but if you still got that stupid, neurotic head with you, it doesn't matter. So that would be my first piece of advice. Why are you going? And are you going because you think things are going to be better? Are you really fooling yourself because you aren't any better? And I would look at quality of life issues, particularly climate change. I mean, Buffalo has so far is escaping the worst aspects of climate change. We don't really, I don't study this in detail. I read and I see what's going on in the rest of the world. We have none of that. We don't have fires, we don't have water shortages, we don't have high heat, we don't have none of that. And so I would ask people about that. I would ask them about what kind of life they want to have for their children, what are their expectations for their children. We need, our city has bad schools, but so does every city have bad schools. But they're not going to get better if smart people or educated people leave. I would just ask them to think twice and wonder if and I'd ask them my grandmother's question, just, you think you're going to, she had a way of saying, well, you think you're so smart. You think you're going to find something better over there?
I can hear it.
So that was when my brother, we had this grandmother. I wrote about her in my book here. And my brother, he was married for 10 years. And we went to like most people, they go to their grandmother and ask some advice, My brother said that he went with his wife and said, Rosie, her name is, Janet and I were going to get a divorce. My grandmother looked at her and said, what, you can do what? So and she turned to my brother and said, well, you think you're such a bargain? She said, you think you're going to find somebody else to put up with you? That's what she said to my brother. She turned to his wife, said, Janet, you think you're such a beaut? You think you're going to find anybody else other than him? So you know what? You're right. So they didn't get a divorce. But anyway, so there you go. I'm not sure. But thank you so much for having me. And
Delightful, Mark.
let's stay in touch. Maureen, give me a call. I'd love to hook up and maybe Mary will all meet together. And
I love that.
we could, seriously, anybody, we should go. I would take you happily to this overlook at Gallagher Beach for sunset. You'll flip. You'll love it. We could take a bottle of wine out there, right?
I'm in.
All right, so I know how to reach Mary and I know how to reach Maureen. And this is an open invitation to who else? We have Olga's here. I don't know the others. Toby Kane.
It's my sister-in-law.
Oh, so you're not a South Buffalo Kane.
No, everybody asks that. My late brother Jim was F. James Kane Jr. He worked for Damon and Maury, and he was an assemblyman in the village, town of Tonawanda, Kenmore,
Mhm.
back in 64, 66, something, a long time ago. And his daughter Liza still lives in Western New York with her mom, or her mom is in Weinberg.
So Mary's in, right? Maureen's
I'm in.
Yep.
Sure,
Maybe
Michaela will
Olga.
join
You
us.
folks know Olga Carmen? She's listening in.
Yes.
She's terrific.
Mhm.
She's a
Cool.
transplant too.
Michaela will have all of the email addresses, so we can reach everybody, Mark.
All right, great.
Thank you. It's been a really delightful
Oh,
evening.
thank you
and,
so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. And yes, I'm sure people will want to
People buy
find the
it.
book.
It's a great book.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it.
All righty.
And hope to see everybody on August 4th and maybe tomorrow night at the Birchfield for Second Friday.
Oh, isn't there an opening of the Birchfield?
A fabulous opening tomorrow.
Tonight?
Bruce Adams and Martha Visertuff. It was a preview tonight, but the official opening is tomorrow night. Yes,
Well,
Okay.
great shows, 2 wonderful shows. So
Yeah.
sure you get to
Oh,
see
that's
them.
great. Thank
I'll
you.
see you very soon.
Goodbye, everyone.
Excited.
Have a
Take
great
care.
night.